The honourable member for Perth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Acting Speaker. Now, I strongly support the amendment that has been moved by my colleagues. I support the underlying thrust of the legislation, but certainly object to the intention or the removal of the industry forum, and I'll go through each of these separately. I think it's really important for us to understand that we need anti-dumping laws because markets aren't perfect as people like to imagine. That we know that an industry can be under attack from overseas or overseas competitors who flood a market with a product at below the cost it takes to develop that product. Now, of course, one of the advantages of doing that is, particularly if you've got a small market like Australia, that's a sort of a relatively incidental cost for a company doing that, but that you can ensure that in that process you can in fact eliminate some of your competition. And so particularly smaller countries like Australia have to be very, very vigilant about this to ensure that that our markets are not improperly and unfairly overrun. We do understand and support the fundamental notion that we are in a globalised economy. But just as we have within our own country internal laws to prevent unfair competition and certain commercial practices which actually are anything other than equitable, that are not fair, and where people can use their position in the market to unfairly disadvantage their competition, then we will act. So likewise, we need to do this in an international forum, and it is a very real problem for us in Australia. In Western Australia, one of the areas where there is strong concern about improper pricing of steel is in the lintel industry. Now, our standard technique of construction in West Australia is somewhat different to the sticks that you hammer together in the eastern states. We have our standard form of construction is double brick, and so we have a much stronger strength lintel. And our manufacturers are very concerned that this galvanised product is coming in from China at about a third of the price that it can be produced in Western Australia. Now, there is concern that because this is a galvanised product, galvanisation is a risky process, one where there does need to be a great deal of care, otherwise people can be injured. There is certainly a level of disbelief that indeed that product is being produced in China for that price. But unfortunately, for many manufacturers, and particularly for smaller outfits as we tend to have in Western Australia, really the delays that are, and the complexity involved in taking an anti-dumping case really mitigates it against being an effective remedy. And the Steel Institute, James England, based in WA, says that the delays are the most costly part of the whole exercise. It is assumed the imposition of a tariff against a dumped good will stop the goods damaging our firms, but it's too late to act after the damaged good has been sold. And he goes on to talk about how that underpriced good goes right through the supply chain, and making it more and more difficult to take action against complex transformed products. So we support and we welcome the government continuing the work that Labor has done, and this is one of these areas where we have seen governments each building upon the initiatives of the previous government to strengthen these positions, and in particular some of the provisions in relation to making it easier to establish that there has been a breach, and ensuring that remedy is available earlier is really important, because delay, as I said, is one of the great impediments to taking an action, as is the complexity. But I do say that I am concerned that we are not properly resourcing. Whether these things will be totally ineffective if we're not properly resourcing the Australian Anti-Dumping Commission. And I note with some concern that Australia's only solar panel manufacturer who is seeking to bring an action, this company Tindo Solar, is seeking to bring an action against the importation of certain of the crystalline silicon solar panels, which they believe are, and for which they seem to have some evidence that these are well below production cost, and indeed that as many of their companies have collapsed or absorbed in recent years, as the global supply cut wreaked havoc through the solar manufacturing industry. So we've got a situation where there's a problem possibly in China itself, leading to our markets being flooded, and our capacity to have any local manufacturing of solar has been arguably compromised. But for the second time, that the Australian Anti-Dumping Commission has in fact put off the investigation of this matter because it claims it just simply has not got the resources given the heavy workload that it has. So it's all very well to come in here and talk about a new legislative framework that is going to make it easier, but if in the case of this, as with Tindo Solar, that in fact you can't get any action taken because the entity does not have sufficient funds, well, it's all for now. So I think that we're going to have to be very vigilant in ensuring that this legislation is something other than a hollow gesture, that we are in fact going to make sure that the ADC is in a position to take the action that we are here empowering it to do. Now, I wanted to talk a bit about the other aspect of this, which is the abolition of the tripartite consultation body, and I think this is a very, very disappointing example of a tendency that we've seen with this government, the extreme anti-union attitude that they have, which really ultimately is in fact very destructive to our economy. When we announced the International Trade Remedies Forum, it was a body that represented a business and the unions, and indeed one might argue that they had a singularity of interest here in ensuring that Australian manufacturing in particular was being given, manufacturing and agriculture, was being given a level playing field on which to compete. And I know from, although as has been said here previously, since the Abbott government is in, that they have not been active, and obviously they're and this has, I think, been to the detriment. I know in Perth when they came in 2013, in the first half of 2013, after they were formed, it was very useful for manufacturers to come to this forum to get a clearer understanding of what was going on, and to know that their concerns were being, as stakeholders, were being taken into the heart of government. And if we can just have a look, I mean, I think it's really interesting if we compare what, this ideological anti-union position that we've got here in Australia with what we see in Germany. And it's interesting just looking at an article that was just written last year, and it's on the sick man of Europe to economic superstar, and they talk about Germany's resurgent economy and how they have managed to survive and, having their difficulties, but when you consider what else the rest of the Western world has been through, they have managed to, in some very trying circumstances where they've had to bail out many economies, that they've nevertheless managed to keep their economy afloat while underwriting the economies of Southern Europe. And they really talk about that the distinctive characteristic of the labour market institutions, and they are those employee associations, trade unions and work councils that have been established, really are what has underpinned German economic success. It really has allowed Germany to react with much greater flexibility than we've seen in other jurisdictions during the GFC. And this is because they have a system that has buy-in from across the society. They have a system of wage floors which are negotiated periodically between trade unions and employer associations, typically at an industry or regional level. And this really has been at the cornerstone in furthering the common interest in improving productivity, so that they have in these agreements created a flexibility within the wage system to increase or decrease hours of workers, which really has been a major contributor to Germany being able to keep the unemployment rate low during the GFC. So we can see even under Conservative administrations like that of Angela Merkel, there's an acceptance of the usefulness of having these tripartite arrangements, the usefulness of having every quotient in the industrial equation engaged in trying to solve these problems, in trying to solve these issues. So what we've got here with, unfortunately, is we've got the reverting to type, avid, primitive, conservative, old school response to the fact of unions and their involvement. That's not a creative way to take our economy forward. So I think that it's indicative of what we see the government doing. I understand that there are a great number of tripartite bodies that they are going around either now dismantling or indeed taking the union membership off those bodies. I think that will make government the poorer for that, and certainly will not be something that boosts our productivity or our effectiveness. So these anti-dumping laws, very important. We must make sure that we give, in our relatively small economy, operating in a global environment, that we ensure that our manufacturers, our agricultural producers, our service providers have a fair and proper basis for competing in that international community. But I'll just make that comment. It amounts to nothing if we are not going to provide adequate resources to the ADC to implement the changes that we are going to be making here today. Thank you.